It began as every parent's worst nightmare: a missing child, a frantic mother, a community desperate for answers. On August 14th, 2025, 7-month-old Emmanuel Haro was reported missing from a parking lot in Yucaipa, California. His mother claimed she had been attacked while changing his diaper, knocked unconscious, and when she awoke, her baby boy was gone. At first, the story gripped the nation. Police launched an Amber Alert. Volunteers searched the streets. Strangers prayed for Emmanuel's safe return. But as investigators dug deeper, cracks began to appear. What started as a case of a kidnapped infant soon unraveled into something far darker. Within days, Emmanuel's own parents would be behind bars, charged with murder. And now, new and disturbing claims from Jake Haro's ex-mother-in-law are painting an even more terrifying picture of who this man really was. This is the tragic story of Emmanuel Haro, a baby whose life was cut short before it truly began. Music pauses briefly, tone shifts directly to the audience. Before we continue, if you believe stories like Emmanuel's deserve to be told, don't just watch in silence. Hit the like button, share this video so more people hear the truth, and subscribe to Shadow Detective for ongoing coverage of cases that demand answers. And let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. So Emmanuel's story can echo far beyond California. His voice was silenced. Don't let his memory be. The morning of August 14th, 2025, started like any other for Rebecca Haro, at least, that's how it seemed. She claimed she had taken her baby, little Emmanuel, to run errands in Yucaipa, a quiet Southern California community. At some point, she stopped at the parking lot of a Big Five sporting goods store. According to Rebecca, as she was changing Emmanuel's diaper in the back seat of her car, she was suddenly attacked. She said an unknown assailant struck her in the head, knocking her unconscious. When she came to, Emmanuel was gone. Within minutes, her frantic 911 call triggered a massive law enforcement response. Officers cordoned off the parking lot, searching for clues. An Amber Alert was quickly issued, blasting Emmanuel's name and face across phones, television screens, and highway signs throughout the region. The community responded with urgency. Volunteers canvassed neighborhoods. Strangers handed out flyers. Social media lit up with Emmanuel's photo. His bright eyes and chubby cheeks shared thousands of times with the same desperate plea: help bring him home. News outlets covered the story almost immediately. To many, it was every parent's nightmare, an innocent child snatched away in broad daylight. And as the hours turned into days, the Haros appeared devastated, begging for Emmanuel's safe return. But behind the scenes, detectives were already noticing something unusual. The story didn't add up, and the more they dug into the details of what really happened that morning, the less likely it seemed that a stranger had taken Emmanuel. In the days following Emmanuel's disappearance, investigators began piecing together Rebecca Haro's account of what happened in that parking lot. But as each hour passed, the story seemed to unravel. First, detectives reviewed surveillance footage from nearby businesses. They expected to find evidence of the attack, perhaps a fleeing suspect, or even a car speeding away. Instead, there was nothing. No attacker, no struggle, no trace of a kidnapping. Officers began interviewing witnesses who were in the area that morning. Shoppers, employees, passers-by. Not a single person reported seeing an assault or a baby being taken. The alleged crime scene was public, yet completely silent. Then came the forensic searches. Investigators brought cadaver dogs into the Haro family's home. They combed through the couple's vehicles. What they found has not been fully disclosed, but it was enough to make detectives suspicious that Emmanuel had never even been in that parking lot on the day of the so-called abduction. Meanwhile, neighbors began speaking up. Some reported never seeing Emmanuel recently. Others described tension within the household, though details varied. The image of a sudden, random kidnapping was no longer fitting the evidence. The timeline itself grew more troubling. Investigators would later conclude that Emmanuel may have died days before August 14th, long before the Amber Alert was ever triggered. To the public, these revelations weren't yet known. Outwardly, Rebecca and Jake Haro appeared as grieving parents. But behind closed doors, detectives were treating them less like victims and more like suspects. As suspicions mounted, authorities began preparing to act. The question was no longer who had taken Emmanuel. The real question was what had his own parents done. On August 22, 2025, just 8 days after Emmanuel was first reported missing, the case took a devastating turn. San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the Haro family's home in Cabazon. By that evening, both Rebecca and Jake Haro were under arrest. The charges stunned the community: murder and filing a false police report. The couple, who just days earlier had begged for their baby's safe return, were now accused of killing him and fabricating the kidnapping story as a cover-up. News cameras captured the scene as investigators swarmed the property, removing evidence and towing away vehicles. Neighbors who had once joined the search now stood in disbelief. How could a mother and father harm their own child? In a press conference that same night, law enforcement confirmed what many had feared: the alleged kidnapping had been a hoax. The story Rebecca told about being attacked in the Big Five parking lot was a lie, and Emmanuel tragically was no longer believed to be alive. For the first time, the nation understood that this was not a case of a stranger danger. It was a case of betrayal inside the very home where Emmanuel should have been safest. Jake and Rebecca were taken into custody on $1 million bail each. Their mugshots would quickly circulate online, transforming the couple from grieving parents to accused murderers in a matter of hours. But as shocking as the arrests were, they only scratched the surface. Because soon the world would learn about Jake Haro's past, a history of violence and abuse that raised an even more disturbing question: why was he ever allowed to be around another child in the first place? When Jake Haro's name first appeared in headlines after Emmanuel's disappearance, many assumed he was simply another desperate parent caught in a nightmare. But soon, journalists and investigators uncovered a darker reality. Jake was no stranger to law enforcement. In fact, his criminal history revealed a deeply troubling past. In 2018, years before Emmanuel was born, Jake was convicted of child cruelty. The victim was his own infant daughter from a previous relationship. Court records described injuries so severe that the little girl would be left permanently disabled. She now lives with cerebral palsy, the result of abuse she suffered at the hands of her father. At the time, Jake pleaded guilty. He was sentenced but not to prison, only probation. It was a decision that many critics now point to as a catastrophic failure of the justice system. Because despite the conviction, Jake was later allowed to build a new family, a family that would include baby Emmanuel. Prosecutors and child advocates have since questioned why stricter measures weren't taken. Why wasn't Jake monitored more closely? Why wasn't he barred from having unsupervised access to future children? These are questions that hang heavy in the air now, as the public tries to make sense of Emmanuel's tragic fate. Former acquaintances and family members began coming forward with accounts of Jake's violent temper and controlling behavior. Words like manipulative, dangerous, and unfit father were repeated again and again. But until Emmanuel's disappearance, many of these warnings remained confined to court files and whispered conversations. And then came the voices from his past relationships, including his ex, mother-in-law. She would soon deliver some of the most damning claims yet about Jake's character, shedding light on what she says was a pattern of abuse and coercion that went far beyond a single case. For Emmanuel's story, Jake's past wasn't just a shadow, it was a warning. A warning that tragically went unheeded. Just when the public thought they had heard the worst about Jake Haro, new allegations surfaced. Allegations that came not from investigators, but from someone who knew him well, his ex-mother-in-law, Margarita Avina. Margarita is the mother of Vanessa Avina, Jake's former partner and the mother of his disabled daughter. In an exclusive interview with The Sun, she did not hold back. Her words painted a chilling portrait of Jake as more than just a man with a criminal record. She described him as controlling, manipulative, and above all, dangerous. According to Margarita, Jake wasn't simply a troubled father who had made mistakes. He was, in her words, a devil. A man who exerted coercive control over her daughter, isolating her from family and bending her will through fear and intimidation. She claims Jake used threats, psychological abuse, and manipulation to dominate Vanessa, and that this toxic cycle created the conditions that led to tragedy. In recounting her experiences, Margarita alleged that Jake was not only violent but calculated. He knew how to present himself publicly, especially to authorities. To outsiders, he could appear calm, even cooperative. But behind closed doors, she says, he was a man consumed by rage. She also raised a question many others have echoed in recent days. How could someone with Jake's background, with a conviction tied to the permanent injury of an infant, still be trusted as a father to a new child? To Margarita, the system failed twice. First, when it allowed Jake to avoid prison after his conviction, and again when it allowed him the opportunity to raise Emmanuel. Her words resonated deeply with a public already shaken by the case. For many, Margarita's testimony was the missing piece of a puzzle. The context that revealed Emmanuel's fate was not just a sudden tragedy, but the result of a long pattern of abuse and systemic oversight. To hear a grandmother describe the man she once had to call family as a devil was chilling enough. But what struck a nerve with so many was the way she tied her own family's suffering to Emmanuel's. Her disabled granddaughter is living proof of the damage Jake inflicted in the past. And Emmanuel, she believes, is another victim whose life was stolen before it had the chance to truly begin. These new claims do more than just tarnish Jake's character. They place his actions into a larger pattern of violence, control, and manipulation. And they reinforce the devastating reality. Emmanuel's story was never about a random stranger, but about a father who had already been given a second chance, and a system that failed to stop him. As investigators pieced together the timeline, the most devastating revelation of all emerged. Emmanuel Haro was likely dead long before his disappearance was ever reported. Prosecutors now believe Emmanuel died sometime between August 5th and August 14th, days before Rebecca Haro claimed she was attacked in that parking lot. That fabricated story, authorities say, was nothing more than a cover-up. A desperate attempt to distract from the truth. What exactly happened inside the Haro home remains unclear. Officials have not released the cause of Emmanuel's death, but what they have confirmed is chilling. Evidence suggests Emmanuel endured a lifetime of abuse condensed into just 7 short months. His injuries, his suffering were not sudden. They were the result of ongoing violence. The most haunting detail of all, Emmanuel's body has still not been found. Despite extensive searches through the Haro's home, their vehicles, and nearby areas, his remains remain missing. Authorities continue to follow leads, determined to give Emmanuel the dignity of a proper burial, and to secure the evidence needed to hold his parents fully accountable. For many, the realization that Emmanuel's death was hidden for over a week is unbearable. While the community searched, while strangers handed out flyers, while police mobilized resources, the truth was that Emmanuel was already gone. The Amber Alert, the frantic searches, the media pleas, all of it had been built on a lie, and yet that lie has now revealed the truth. Emmanuel's death is no longer a mystery abduction. It is, prosecutors allege, a murder. One committed not by a stranger, but by the very people who were supposed to love and protect him. The arrest of Jake and Rebecca Haro sparked public outrage. Not only because of the unimaginable loss of 7-month-old Emmanuel, but because of what many see as a failure of the system to protect him. People questioned why Jake, a man convicted of child cruelty in 2018, was ever allowed to raise another infant. How could the courts place him on probation after permanently disabling one child? How did Child Protective Services fail to intervene when Emmanuel was born? And why were warnings from those who knew Jake ignored? In town halls, online forums, and social media feeds, the same cry echoed: this should never have happened. Advocates pointed to Emmanuel's case as yet another example of cracks in the child welfare system. cracks that allow abusers to slip through and reoffend. Beyond California, the case resonated nationwide. Parents watched in disbelief, sharing Emmanuel's photo not as a missing child anymore, but as a symbol of the vulnerabilities too many children face. Commentators compared the case to other tragic failures, where red flags were overlooked, and children paid the price. To the public, Emmanuel's death is not just a personal tragedy, it is a collective indictment of the institutions meant to safeguard children. And with every revelation about Jake's past and Rebecca's lies, that outrage only grows louder. 7 months. That was all the time Emmanuel Haro had in this world. 7 months filled not with the safety and warmth every child deserves, but according to prosecutors, with abuse, fear, and neglect. His life ended before it truly began, stolen by the very people who should have been his protectors. Today, Jake and Rebecca Haro await trial, their fates now in the hands of the justice system. But no verdict, no sentence, can undo what has already been done. Emmanuel will never take his first steps. He will never say his first words. He will never grow up. And that is the real tragedy of this story. The question we are left with is not just how Emmanuel died, but how the system failed him. How many warnings must be ignored? How many children must be hurt before change is forced? Emmanuel's case is not just a story about one family, it is a story about society's responsibility to its most vulnerable. If you believe Emmanuel's story matters, don't let it fade away. Honor his memory by sharing it. Hit the like button, subscribe to Shadow Detective, and help us bring more of these hidden truths to light. And please drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Together we can make sure Emmanuel's short life is not forgotten, and that his story serves as a reminder that silence can be deadly.